I'm here to share a sermon sidebar with you. This is stuff that didn't make the cut in my sermon on healthy emotions, but I have really enjoyed the research. I wanted to share some of these insights with you. So, as recap where we have been in this sermon series, we're talking about what it means to be a human, not just a human who bears God's image, but a healthy human. So, how do we have healthy minds, healthy bodies, healthy emotions, healthy relationships, and healthy desires? These are the five key components to a human being that we're looking at. And week by week, we're going through them and talking about being healthy. We looked at this quote from Pete Scazzero: to feel is to be human, to minimize or deny what we feel is a distortion of what it means to be image bearers of our personal God. And we even said yesterday that God feels, and we are created in God's image. We feel too. We serve an emotional God. It's not bad to be emotional, it's just part of who we are. So, we're going to talk about the science behind that today. That's the part that I skipped yesterday. And then, what are some symptoms and causes of unhealthy emotions? So, those are the things that we're looking at in today's sermon sidebar. Again, as recap, we said yesterday that feelings are, with a few exceptions, good servants, but they are disastrous masters. This was a quote from Dallas Willard. His book, Renovation of the Heart, is very insightful. He also takes us through body, mind, emotions, relationships, and talks about what does renewal look like. So I've used him as a primary source in addition, of course, to the scriptures in this. In fact, talking about the scriptures, here's what we said yesterday: a biblical summary of emotions. The triune God shows emotion but is not swayed by them. He is personally engaged with creation. We looked at verses where Father, Son, and Spirit all expressed emotions. Those emotions include happiness, they included jealousy or anger, they included compassion, and we also talked about God's, oh, I forget the fourth one. Now, grief, the grief that God feels. We also looked at human emotion, how it's natural, varied, good, and complex. Our emotions can connect us or separate us from God and others, so they have a real strong relational nature to them. And I've already hinted at this quote see here by Pete Scazzero. So the Bible is our primary source for emotional health, but then we're also looking at science. It's another book that we can look at, and I like to take pride in the fact that the Bible and science, they work hand in hand. There's often this idea that science, psychology, etc., they are opponents. I like to say that science validates some things that we see in scripture. And so let's look at what the science says about emotion. We're going to start with Darwin's reference to emotion. He is obviously known for The Origin of Species, but he wrote a less familiar book on understanding human emotions by looking at the expressions of human faces and animal faces. And he was trying to say, what can we learn from facial expressions? As Vanderkolk in their book, The Body Keeps Score, works through some of Darwin's material, he says emotions, from the Latin word emovere, to move out, give shape and direction to whatever we do, and their primary expression is through the muscles of the face and body. These facial and physical movements communicate our mental state and intentions to other. Angry expressions and threatening postures caution them to back off. Sadness attracts care and attention. And so, in the evolutionary study of the face in animals and human beings, they say you can see these looks like, oh, says to someone, back off, you're in danger. Oh, come close, I need comfort. In fact, one of the things you'll see in Darwin's work, and Basil van der Kolk covers this in his book, is that the faces of humans and the faces of animals can be compared. So we have some animal expressions next to human expressions. And then this was actually expanded on by Paul Ekman. He is a more contemporary scientist who studies the the expression of faces and muscle movements of the faces. Don't know if you knew this, but our faces have 43 muscles, and there are two primary muscles that are used in the smile. There's the, I think it's called the zygotus, or I got this, the zygomatus, and the orbicularis oculi. So these are the muscles around the eyes and down here. And when you do a real smile, you can actually tell by the eyes. The eyes don't lie. You can do fake smiles, and the eyes aren't involved. So Paul Ekman has studied facial expressions, and other scientists have studied facial expressions, and you can see from the movements in the muscles these varied emotions or feelings that are expressed. So wonder, happiness, fright, disgust, these are some of the primary emotions. Now, we also know from more modern science that it's not just the face that shows what's going on with feelings, but also the brain. And because of neurology and brain scans and MRIs and these other things, we can see that there's a lot of activity that's going on in different regions in the brain. And we can see that different aspects of the brain are energized or awakened or firing when the human brain's feeling different emotions. So there's this whole field called affective neuroscience, and it teaches us a different lesson that emotion's a gift. It helps us to quickly and efficiently make sense of circumstances so that we can react as necessary. It feeds into our rational thought so that we can react as necessary. It feeds into our rational thought, allowing us in most cases to make better decisions, and it helps us connect with and communicate with others. So our brains help us see there's firing that goes on that says, this is a dangerous situation, I should run. Or this is a loving person, I should draw close to them and share my thoughts. And there's lots of activity that we can map in the brains. So some of the older thinking and research about the brain was that we had this downstairs animalistic part of our brain, the lizard brain is what they'd call it, that was there to protect us. And when danger came, we would flee, we would fight, we would freeze, sometimes we would faint. That part was really activated, the amygdala. And newer brain science is saying actually there's all sorts of activity going on, not just downstairs, but upstairs, not just left, but right, and they're all interacting. And so we can't tie emotions to a particular part of our brain, but some of the earlier research was saying most of the emotion, especially to protect ourselves, came downstairs. Again, in the book Emotional, we now know that emotion is profoundly integrated into the neural circuits of our brain, inseparable from our circuits for rational thought. We could live without reason, but we could be completely dysfunctional. We would be completely dysfunctional if we couldn't feel. And so there's parts of our brain that we often identify with rational thinking. We would call that the upstairs brain, and we would call that the left side of the brain. We actually see emotion processed on the left side and the right side, the upstairs and the downstairs. So some of the modern science is making us think differently about how we're processing and predicting things. One other scientist who's really thinking through processing and predicting is actually, this is in the next slide. It's Barrett, How Emotions Are Made. And she says that our emotion is your brain's creation of what your bodily sensations mean in relation to what's going on around you and in the world. And so what's going on with our emotions is they're helping us to predict what's going on based on past experiences that are wired into our brain. Our brain is constantly then trying to predict what is coming next. This is what I've experienced before, what's coming next, and our emotions are part of that process. In fact, I skipped this quote. I really like this, and I shared this yesterday, according to Goodman and Toxic Positivity. The emotion is according to her rendering, is what's going on physiologically and maybe even neurologically. It's like rapid heartbeat or difficulty breathing that gives you information about the world. And it's a complex reaction pattern that's determined by the significance of the event. The feeling is your conscious awareness of the emotion of the self. So Goodman distinguishes between an emotion, which is what's going on in your body automatically, and your feeling, it's how you're processing that. Because your brain is always processing inputs, and it's always then predicting the future based upon that processing. So there's a lot going on inside of our minds with emotions. You've got processing, you've got predicting, you got downstairs, you got upstairs, you got rational, you got emotional, and all of this is wiring. In the meantime, it shows up in our faces with wonder and surprise or anger and disgust. And these are things that we can read from others because we're constantly trying to connect with others. In fact, one other person I would cite, and you can find this in a podcast I shared on our church's email this week, is Kurt Thompson, neurologist. He says that we learn to regulate our emotions from other people. There's this idea called co-regulation. So the way that we control our emotions, because they're terrible masters, is that we process them, we think about them, we attach them to memories, right? But we don't do that all by ourselves. We also do that from other people who have taught us how to regulate our emotions. Like the first time we're crying and sad or upset about something, our little child brain watches mom or dad or our guardian help us process that emotion. They help us regulate that emotion. And so we learn to regulate our emotions from other people. So none of this stuff is disconnected. Our bodies show up in our emotion. We learn how to regulate from other people. Relationship is tied to emotion. We process it in our brain. Our mind is tied to emotion. Aren't we fearfully and wonderfully made, just like God said? The last thing I'd say about emotions here is there's two primary ways that we feel them on a scale. There's the arousal scale, so that's the intensity in which we feel an emotion. And there's also what they call a valence or valence. And the valence is how positive or good this emotion feels, or negative valence would be this is something unpleasant. So every emotion we feel, we're processing it, is really high in intensity, or it might be low in intensity. It's real positive in its feel, or it has an unpleasant feeling to it. And those are two primary ways that we feel our feelings, arousal and valence. And those are tied together on this quadrant here. So just as a overview or a summary, emotions protect us and connect us. Emotions process inputs and predict outcomes. And according to Neil Anderson, he says they're God's indicators to let you know what is going on inside. They're neither good nor bad. They are amoral, just part of your humanity. Just as you respond to the warnings of physical pain, you also need to learn to respond to your emotional indicators. And so that's what we want to learn to do. The other thing that we want to do to be healthy humans is pay attention to, so what are some symptoms of unhealthy emotions and what are causes? And just very briefly, I'll highlight these symptoms of unhealthy emotions: addiction, apathy, busyness. People who never want to feel their emotions, so they get addicted to work or media or a feeling or cutting. That's a symptom of unhealthy emotion. Alexithymia is the inability to articulate your emotions. But emotions and emotional unhealth may show up in your body too: body ache, fatigue, insomnia, digestive issues, racing heart rate, high blood pressure, shortness of breath. This could be heightened anxiety or anger. And then some of these terms we're familiar with in the mental health world, which would be anxiety and depression. These are just a few of the symptoms that we have of unhealthy emotions. But I could also add to this, if you wonder if there's addiction, how's addiction unhealthy emotion? Well, the addict is one, according to Dallas Willard, who in one way or another has given in to feeling of one kind or another and has placed it in the position of ultimate value in his or her life. And so it's a symptom of unhealthy feelings when you work really hard not to feel things or absolutely control how you feel things. And that's what an addict is doing, is they're really trying to control their feelings through substances, through self-harm, through diet, through busyness. And some of us have more of a tendency to addiction than we think because we don't want to feel. What are some causes, very briefly, some causes of unhealth? And I don't say causes here, I say influences. I think it's a better term. It's really hard to tease out causes, but trauma, suffering, attachment, abuse, mental health disorders, peer, school, and social media influence. Our environment affects our emotions, genetics and body, and of course, spiritual warfare. So as I close out, it's important for us to pay attention to our emotions. To borrow language from Jenny Allen in Untangle Your Emotions, feelings aren't meant to be fixed, they're meant to be felt. And as I said yesterday, to flourish as a human, you have to learn to feel. I hope this helped you.